Spencer,
Pampa.
nice to have you. We were joking before we came on, which one of us was the bigger nerd, and that we get into these topics and we can't keep our mouth shut and we just rattle on because we want to talk about the science. I promise you, folks, we're not going to bore you in the science. However, I blamed him for diving too deep into the science. So if it happens, it's his fault. I promise you. No, I love this guy. I do. Because when he takes a deep dive, he takes a deep dive, and we can get lost in it. But this topic, gosh, is it relevant right now? I mean, when you look at what's happened in the last year or so, my gosh, the amount of stressors we're under. I mean, I can think of so many ways that our DNA right now is under attack. I can think of so many ways, that we as a human need to be concerned, or I should say that reasons that we need to be concerned. And this show is digging into some of your research, and I'll share some of mine too. By the way, coaching my doctors, these topics have been brought up again and again on our training calls because they are concerned, as I am. We all are concerned about some of the topics that we're hearing, more and more, even on mainstream media, as far as, how we can be under attack at the cellular level. And we're concerned, all of us are. So this show is about what can we do. Spencer, you've been diving in, man. Let's just bring it. Let's bring it. What do we need to do right now?
Thanks, Dr. Pampa. We're not just looking to protect our own genetics, we're looking to protect future generations. So it's something that we definitely need to start thinking about. So agreed, in our current environment, there are a lot of things that are challenging to our genetic integrity. So I wanted to know what I could do for myself, for my friends, for my family. And as I'm going through the research and as I'm thinking about, what I would want to create, I came up with 5 firewalls. I would say is a good way of phrasing it. Things that we can put between ourselves and a bad genetic outcome to protect the genes that God gave us the way that God gave it to them.
Right.
Yeah. So it's estimated that a strand of DNA in an average human cell goes through something like 100,000 bits of damage a day. And this is from endogenous oxidants like superoxides and environmental chemicals and even sunburns. But we're still here. Cancer, even though it does end up taking a lot of lives, is not something that kills everybody. And when it does, it's usually, at a later point in their life. So clearly, even though our genes are constantly being stressed and damaged, we have a very robust genetic repair system that God gave us. So the question I have is, what can we do to work with what God gave us, to work with that genetic repair system, to enhance it, to support it in the times that we now live in? And so I'd like to talk about what I call the first firewall. So the most effective animal that I've come across, and I like to go to animals and plants because they deal with some of the same issues that we do. Plants and animals have to deal with viruses and fungi and bacteria and parasites and cancer, and sometimes they have a better idea than we do on how to do it, and we can learn from them. So in the animal world, the most ants have what are considered to be some of the most efficient genetic repair systems known. And there was a famous German doctor named Hans Nieper, who really started looking into ants. Now, ant extracts have been used in Chinese medicine for millennia, but Hans Nieper kind of went at it from his scientific angle, and he identified this compound called iridoyl. It's a dialdehyde, and the aldehyde groups are basically alcohols with a hydrogen removed. And so he identified that it was the dialdehyde iridoyl that was responsible for this fantastic
How do you
capacity.
spell it? How do you spell that?
Iridodial.
Got it.
Right. And that was what was responsible for the ants' spectacular capacity to repair DNA. I heard it once said that ants don't even have an immune system. They just repair their DNA so fast it doesn't matter. Now, I don't know if that's true or hyperbole, but it's an interesting concept, that being able to repair your DNA is vitally important, and the ants have figured out how to do it. So the first firewall, I would say, would be to support the body's ability to repair its own DNA, and I would consider using an ant extract.
Interesting. You said an ant extract. We can actually get an ant extract that's on the market.
Sure. Like I said, in Chinese medicine, ants are considered one of their top medical top therapies, top protocols, top supplements. They have it broken down into things that are great and good and okay, and the really super ones, ants fall into that category.
So Aerododol, is that how you say it?
Iridoidal, right? But the
Iridoidal?
easiest thing to do is simply to you don't have to necessarily spend the money on the extract. You can purchase ant powder, and it's bitter. If you mix it with something sweet, it's like a little bit like bitter chocolate. It's not bad.
Huh, interesting. Do you need a lot of it, or are you microdosing it?
Oh no, you'd want to be not microdosing it. You'd want to be taking it in milligram to gram levels. The other thing is ants, I believe, have a lot of ATP in them. So if you do take ant extract, you may notice a lot more endurance. I certainly do.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's a very unique ingredient, right? And because it's from ants, I mean, I'm just, have you ever tested it? I mean, you, like me, are, very cautious of heavy metals. And look, anything that comes from China, I'm always cautious, but have you tested it?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly want to get something from a reputable place with honest COAs, certificate of analyses.
Yeah.
There are things out of Asia that you can get if you don't have good connections, where it might be sitting on a dock for a long time and getting moldy. So indeed, anything that you're getting, you want to test. But I would say that is true for anything from anywhere now, because no matter where you're sourcing it, it's probably coming from China.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's why we test everything. I test everything. Now, is there a way to test the active ingredient? In this case, the Aerododol, can you test it?
I'm sure there is. It's beyond my capacity, but I'm sure there is a way to do that.
But it's in every ground up ant, as you would say, and every ant powder is going to have it in it, no matter what.
Right. So, you may not get it to the concentration as if someone did some kind of extraction, but you're certainly going to get it.
Okay, interesting. Has there been any studies on this? If we take an ant, we take the ant powder and utilize it. Have there been any in vitro studies with DNA, DNA repair in vitro? What's been done?
That's a great question. I haven't done a deep dive on PubMed in terms of ant extracts. I would not be surprised if there aren't a lot of studies on ants, because the Chinese are also doing studies to validate their own pharmacopoeia. Don't know if they would have done anything specifically about DNA. We're kind of relying on Hans Nieper's original work on this one.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. That's the first one. Are we going to 2?
All right. Number 2.
Now I'm going to say this right now, because people are going, I don't want you people to stop listening. You actually put a product together. I believe they can pre-order it now. Ashley will put a link to do that, but you put a product together with all of these firewalls, correct?
Yes. For all of the ingredients that I'm going to talk with you about today, and the firewalls that I consider them to be part of, we do have all of that in one particular product called Regenemin.
Okay.
But most of these ingredients you can also source locally if you like.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah, awesome. So whether you find it yourself or get pre-order the product, awesome. Which again, I'm interested in the topic, and I think that even by putting some aspect of some of these ingredients together, I think it's very wise. And like I said, I'm going to share some of the things that I've been doing personally for this protection myself in these days. But go ahead, let's go to 2.
Okay. So the second one would be gene silencing. Now, no doubt you've heard the term gain of function on being spoken of. Well, gene silencing is the opposite. Gene silencing is loss of function. It's how you take a function away from something. It's the process the body uses to turn off genes. Now, usually it's just there to keep genes from producing the wrong proteins. And what I mean by this is the same DNA, the same DNA is in a bone cell as in a skin cell. All the information is in both cells, but the bone cell makes bone proteins and the skin cell makes skin proteins. And that's because the DNA is only activated as it's needed for the particular cell it finds itself in. And part of this has to do with gene silencing. It's how the system organizes itself. But the other thing gene silencing can do is it can keep the bad genes from making damaging proteins.
Yeah.
So if there's a gene that either gets into the body or a gene that goes wrong, either way, if we have genes in our bodies that are creating proteins that we don't want, then we need to know how to, interact with the creation of those proteins, maybe so they don't happen in the first place. So
by the way, I think that's one of the untalked about benefits of fasting. Is you get gene silencing. We hear about triggering the SIRT1 gene, that's turning on a gene for longevity. We hear, about the benefits of autophagy, getting rid of bad cells, but we rarely hear about gene silencing, which there's so much research on fasting, and that is part of the magic. Is genes, bad things get turned off and downregulated, and that's called gene silencing. So yeah, there's a lot of strong research. The importance of this is huge.
Absolutely. Gene silencing is an enormously complicated process. I showed you that huge book I'd gone through on, was just part of it.
So we must have hit a really important point there, because I heard the rooster crow. So
yeah, I'm at my country home.
Okay.
So 2 places where gene silencing can happen are at the transcriptional and the translational levels.
Another really important point. We're going to go with that. Go ahead.
Right. So gene silencing at a transcriptional level would be the DNA doesn't get to the point where it opens up and then goes and creates the RNA that makes the protein. That would be transcriptional gene silencing. Translational gene silencing is, okay, the DNA has opened, the RNA has been formed, but it doesn't make it to the ribosomes in the cytoplasm or the endoplasmic reticulum to make the proteins. Now, there are other gene silencing pathways, but that's just to give you an example of how important a process this is for the body, that it gives you multiple ways to do the same thing. It's a highly redundant system because it's a very important system. And it's important not just so that a bone cell is a bone cell and a skin cell is a skin cell. It's important also so that when viruses come into us and want to hijack us to make proteins that they think we should have, or more of their own viruses, that our body can be like, well, no, I don't want to produce that right now. Thank you. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, a major player in gene silencing is methylation. And a methyl group is a carbon and 3 hydrogens that gets attached to something. And, it's responsible for how our neurotransmitters function. And it's a hugely important process inside the body, putting on and taking off methyl groups. And about half of us are what are called undermethylators. Yeah. Whereas another 10% of us might be considered overmethylators. And this has to do in part with genetic flaws like the MTHFR SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms in our genes. So if you've ever done a 23andMe test or a genetic test, you might find that you have an MTHFR issue, and that would be the methylation pathway. So as an example, genetically, the whole species has pretty much lost the ability to make vitamin C. But in terms of methylation, about half of us are not doing the methylation properly. So, you can't just give somebody a bunch of trimethylglycine and ramp up, their methylation, or maybe some methylfolate, because it's not going to work for everyone. For the overmethylators, you might make them worse, right? So, what we really want is something that will balance the methylation pathway so that the gene silencing is at its most efficient. So what we want is a methylation adaptogen. And for that, I use curcumin. You can also use lutein, but I use curcumin for that because curcumin has multiple uses in this particular firewall system I'm putting together.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And I've read similar research about curcumin. So, all right, third one.
Well, hang on. So one last thing about the gene silencing. Methylation, among other things, is also used to detoxify certain metals and certain chemicals like glyphosate and parabens, for example, right? So if we have a load of chemicals and or metals in our body, then we are wasting what methylation we have on detoxification. Then there's going to be less available for gene silencing.
Yeah, it's called the methylation priority principle. You'll prioritize methyl groups because it's so important. Even it activates cortisol. So if people that are very stressed in any aspect, physically, chemically, or emotionally, they take methyl groups to deal with that stress. And then it leaves DNA vulnerable.
Yeah. So what we can do is we can do some kind of detox. We make metacardium and Zenaplex to support metal and chemical detoxification. But whatever detox you do, if you're going to kind of follow this 5 firewall concept protocol, it's important that we do that our methyl pathways are not being overworked by with other things like detox that are easily dealt with other simple protocols.
I agree.
All right, let's get to the third firewall. So when the Human Genome Project was finished in, I think, April 2003, scientists, were in for a shock. They reported that 98% of the human genome did not code for making proteins. And so they said, well, this non-protein coding DNA is junk DNA. It serves no purpose. We're full of junk DNA.
Wrong.
Yeah. So clearly that's not accurate. We now know that a lot of that DNA has a regulatory capacity, right? But having said that, there is a theory that says that there still is a lot of junk DNA in the human DNA. Now, I know some people will say there's no junk DNA. It's a point for, this is something that people aren't agreed about. Yeah. But a lot of people would say in the scientific community that there's an awful lot of DNA that we don't know what it does, and we think it's leftovers of old viral infections that got into the DNA and then got silenced, right? But couldn't be removed. So this may be the fate of viruses that get in. The body is able to silence them, keeps them from causing any problems, but just can't kick them out of the library. Okay. Now, some people, it's estimated now that maybe 80% of our DNA is this kind of viral leftover material that we just can't get rid of, but it's not causing us too much problems. That doesn't mean it's causing us no problems. Yeah. Now take a look at something like Utricularia gibba, or the common name is the Venus flytrap. That's only 3% of what's considered junk DNA. So the Venus flytrap plant has figured out how to remove code from its DNA that doesn't belong there. They're like the ants are the superstars or the superheroes of the genetic repair world. The Venus flytrap is the superstar of removing this non-coding and what some would call junk DNA.
Okay.
So the third firewall could be to support the body's ability to remove bits of genetic code completely right out of the gene. And what we could do for that would be something like the Venus flytrap.
Yeah, and I think this subject is pretty deep today. Without mentioning things, because there's a lot of ways that we're given these codes, if you will, right? Taking them in, even unintentionally taking them in. I mean, this is something that's in the science. It's not my opinion, right? I mean, we know that there's, terms for sharing these things. There's always been a concern with this, right? When someone gets a treatment, they can actually, share some of that virus with other people, right? I mean, that's been a term in science for a long time. I think the word was shedding that has been used. So I think there's a lot of concern about that. So Venus flytrap obviously can help with this. It's funny because Venus flytrap is also an anti-pathogen. People use it for, I think, viruses in particular, right? Just getting rid of viruses if you're exposed. So obviously it's part of its action regardless, because people take it if they feel like they're getting sick.
Right. And so that takes us back to, is what it's doing going after the virus and or going after the code that the virus puts in?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we're being careful with our words, but yeah, I think it's very relevant right now. Anyway, so we better get to number 4 before I get this thing whole shut down. Go ahead.
Okay. So the 4th firewall is the self-destruct signal for infected cells. Now, if a bad code gets inserted into the genes and starts pumping out damaging proteins or other versions of the virus, the cell is supposed to take one for the team and hit the self-destruct button. And that's through the p53 gene. And so this process is called apoptosis or apoesis, depending on where you went to medical school. And it's the process where the cell literally digests everything inside of itself, turns to goo, and just self-destructs.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that the herpes family of viruses, and that's herpes, and it's not just genital herpes, it's also oral herpes, which most people I think have, chickenpox, Epstein-Barr, mono, cytomegalovirus, these are all in the herpes family. So a lot of us have been exposed to a virus that can damage the p53 gene, which is the very gene responsible for apoptosis or the self-destruct signal. So what we need is something that can support the self-destruct apoptosis signal, so that cells that get overwhelmed and start making these damaging proteins can be shut down, right? Just shut it down right at this, just turn the whole cell off. Now, there is one of my favorite ingredients is alagitanin, and alagitanin is known to support the apoptotic cycle. So supporting healthy apoptosis with alagitanin is what I would call the 4th firewall. Now, like a lot of the compounds that I'm sharing with you today, a lot of these work on multiple pathways, right? So you mentioned that Venus flytrap may also be antiviral. Alagitanin alagitanin has been shown to inhibit integrase, which is the enzyme a lot of viruses need to enter the cell. So again, I'm simplifying it, but a lot of these ingredients were chosen because they actually work on multiple simultaneous pathways to support our health in this particular endeavor.
Alagitanin. So am I spelling it correctly? Give me a spelling on it first off.
Yeah, sure. It's what's found in the raspberry extracts,
okay.
Or maple blow leaf. So it's ELLAGITANIN.
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, again, multiple positive effects on the immune system with that, right? But I think, like I said, the specifically around apoptosis is, I think you're right. I could see that being huge. All right.
Yeah, I mean, for each of these firewalls, there were a few different ingredients I could have picked. And when I would look at each of them, I would say, okay, of these 5 or so ingredients that might do any particular job, which ones will blend well and work as backup synergistically with all the other ones we're using. Yeah. So the 5th firewall has to do with T regulatory cells. So one of the ways if a damaged gene directs cells to make rogue proteins that are similar to proteins that are already in our body, I'll say it again, if damaged genes direct our cells to produce rogue proteins that are similar to proteins that are already in our body,
Got it.
then we risk systemic autoimmune reactions.
That's right.
Okay.
Which, by the way, is a concern of many scientists today,
Yeah.
of everything that's going on.
Now, the body has the ability to clear out rogue proteins, but it takes time. It takes time to recognize that the proteins are there and figure out how to deal with them. So it's important to keep the immune system in balance during this critical learning phase while the body is recognizing, hey, I've got some bad genes. How do I silence them? How do I remove them? How do I destroy the cells that are a lost cause? You know, how do I break down these rogue proteins? While this whole process is happening, we want to make sure that our immune system keeps its cool, stays calm, doesn't freak out. Because if it freaks out, if it sees these proteins as a big threat and they're like the proteins in our body, that's a hard thing to walk back. It's hard to undo an systemic autoimmune reaction. Ask anyone who's got a chronic autoimmune disease.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So what we need to do is we need to give the body time to work it out. Each of these firewalls is designed to slow this process down so that we have the time, our bodies have the time to learn how to mount their own intelligent defense onto what they're dealing with. Okay, so the immune system, like the genetics, have multiple redundant systems. The one I'm going to talk about is the T regulatory cells. Now, these are a class of lymphocytes. T cells means they're coming from the thymus. Right, give yourself a little thymus thump. This is a subset of lymphocytes that suppress inflammatory cytokines and will create things that will calm the system down. Now, there's a lot of things out there that suppress T regulatory cells on purpose. There are technologies that are designed specifically to lower the T regulatory cells so that you do have an aggressive response to something. We want to do the opposite. We want to raise and support and uplift our T regulatory cells so that they can keep our immune system balanced while this process plays out and our body learns how to handle it. Now curcumin, which we talked about in the second firewall of gene silencing, it supports healthy Treg cells, right? So there's a multiple purpose, but the one that I think is best for it is astragalus. Astragalus is my go-to for getting the T regulatory cells to support them in a healthy manifestation.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Absolutely. Yeah, T reg cells, I always say, just tell your immune system, back up. It's okay. It's okay. Right. And a lot of people have gut challenges, struggle with a bacteria called Bacteroides fragilis, that you need that bacteria to actually make T reg cells.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So if we don't have enough of fragilis, then we won't have enough T reg. So that's the gut connection oftentimes to autoimmune through T regulatory cells.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
now, as a note, T reg cells are at their lowest for women during the luteal phase of their cycle, which is when if they have PMS, it's right there, right? That's their lowest point, and that's when they're the most inflamed. So that's a time when women would need to be especially supported if they're dealing with this kind of situation. So we have a product that we're coming out with called Regenemin, which has all the ingredients we've discussed for all these firewalls. And if that's something that you want to get for yourself, you can, but I've also given you all the ingredients, so you can certainly do that for yourself. The only one that might be a little tricky to find would be Vitis flytrap. But I'm curious, you mentioned off camera a little while ago some other ingredients that we might add to the formula. What kind of things would you put in for something like this?
Yeah, again, it came out of a lot of our discussions with our doctor group. How do we protect ourselves, right, in this environment? And yeah, obviously you had talked a little bit about suppression, right, gene suppression, and took me into an area of research on messenger RNA decay. We want to knock down oftentimes these messages that are coming in, right? And we want to diminish that so we don't keep our body, our immune system making certain things. I'm being very vague on purpose. Anyways, and so as practitioners, we are concerned about that, even for our own protection. Some of the research that I found is iodine has an incredible effect on that, and so does quercetin and zinc, especially in that combination. I think a lot of people are taking zinc right now. Quercetin allows zinc to penetrate into the cell much better, affect the DNA much better, so it would be perfect for this formula. Quercetin, again, it suppresses microRNA. It helps the decay. Gosh, if I had my notes in front of you, I'll send you some of the studies that I found on it. But I think even Ashley has them because we put together a protocol. But yeah, it's just, I think adding that to what you have maybe in Formula 2, right? Or, I think you're in production here, but would be people can do that right away, I think, and add some of this DNA protection. And again, right now, I think there's a lot of stress on our DNA. You look at Lipton's work, where we're talking about how our thoughts can change our DNA and therefore the proteins we make or not make. And therefore, if we change the proteins, we change who we are, who we become, from the immune system all the way through, to here we are as a load of proteins, right? No more. We think about the stress that human has been under on this planet in the last year, right? Obviously, there's multiple ways that our DNA is under attack, some of which we can talk about, some of which we shouldn't, but the bottom line is I hope people see the underlying importance of the research you've done here. I sure do, because this has been a topic with my doctor group in big time. And I think people need to pay attention to this topic. You may not understand the science completely, folks, but I assure you, it's beyond you. Spencer, you pointed it out in the beginning. We're talking about future generations here, right? We're talking about when we look back in times in history, we realize that stressors affect DNA. Chernobyl affected generations of people in certain areas that's still being affected. Bacteria adapt very quickly, humans adapt much slower, right? So I think we need to just pay attention to this time in history, and really act accordingly. And I think the people that do, I think are going to be in the best position. I look at everything, Spencer, is how can I position my thought pattern to take, because we can't change our situation, but we can change how we think about it, how we react to it, right? And my goal throughout this whole time in history, has really been to take advantage in a good way so I can affect others in a positive way, take advantage of the stress and the stressors in the situation, and really take my health to another level, take advantage of it just from a thought process, even from a financial process, in the sense that, every time there's a hard time in history, people that go, this is an opportunity, and they step in and they change the world for good. And that's been my intention since the beginning of this. But I think this whole topic that we're talking about takes that intention to a level of health and generational that we need to pay attention to. So thank you for this information.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Dr. Pop.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will put a link for you to pre-order the product. People like it when they don't have to go and buy a bunch of different things in a lot of different places. And I know you, like me, you test the ingredients. So we're proud.
Yeah, everything is tested twice before it goes out the door.
I'm always proud to carry any product you develop because I know who you are, man. So we appreciate that, and we will absolutely share the link with our viewers. Thank you, Spencer.
Thanks, Dr. Pomp. Have a great day.